Push-ups are a great staple in any training program for many reasons. I love training push-ups and I love teaching push-ups especially. So I'm going to walk you through my process for teaching how to do a strong push-up or making your push-ups that you already are doing better. And it does not involve an incline push-up or a push-up on the knees in a plank position this way, okay? So I'm going to basically separate the two pieces of the push-up, the mechanical piece, which is the upper body press, and the plank piece, which is totally separate. Once we work on those separately, individually, then we can bring them back together for a better push-up position, for a better push-up pattern. There are joint prerequisites that are required for a push-up. So if you are experiencing hand or wrist, elbow, shoulder, scapula, or even upper back and neck pain during push-ups, that may be a mobility issue that you'll need to address separately. But assuming that mobility is there, we've got shoulder rotation, scapular movement, we've got wrist movement, then we can move on to my process. So I'm starting with a quadruped push-up. So yes, this is a push-up on the knees, but we are not in that plank position. We are purely working on the mechanics of this essentially chest press by lowering yourself to the floor and coming back up. So we work on the position of the upper body, which is wrists right underneath shoulders. Middle fingers are going to point straight ahead, so we don't want this to happen in the wrists. We want the knees to be underneath the hips. So we're in this quadrupedal position. I like to tuck the toes under and I like to coach to keep the toes on the floor throughout the movement. A progression would be to either lift the feet or you could even lift the knees in this push-up. But just to start out, keep the toes on the floor, keep the knees on the floor. We're going to start with this retraction of the scapula. So the first movement of your push-up is always going to be retract or squeezing those shoulder blades together. And you're gonna keep that retraction as you pull yourself to the floor and then push up from there. The scapula will naturally protract as you push away from the floor, which is exactly what we want. But that retraction will help support the body and control the movement as you pull down to the floor. Imagine you're doing a row. So you're almost rowing your body to the floor as you come down. All right? So those are essentially the mechanics of the push-up, and then we put it together with this quadruped position. First things first, we're gonna do target practice. So I'm gonna slide a yoga block or a target out in front of me and put my hands down behind it. I want to dive my nose or my chin to the target, which is out in front. A common mistake that I see is that the head wants to go down between the hands, and this is not a very supportive position for the shoulders and the upper body. So I want to dive my chest and my head forward so that I have this nice and supportive elbow on top of wrist position at the bottom of my push-up. That's going to be much more efficient to push out of. So once I get that mechanics of retract, pull, dive the chest forward to press up, I can move my target lower. And I dive a little bit lower into that position. And I always make sure that we have control at the bottom of the movement as well. So we're not going to just bounce out of that push-up. We're going to hit the target, hold it, and then push it back. To progress this even more, I bring the block or the target underneath the chest. So the target goes between the hands, and now I'm bringing my chest to the target and pushing up from there. This just allows for a deeper push-up position, and now we're really focusing on diving the chest to that deep push-up position. Once we get the quadruped push-up, or even simultaneously, we can also work on building strength in the plank position, which is your base position for your full push-up. So we want to make sure in the plank, I always coach some protraction of the scapula. A common mistake I see is that people will actually drop the hips here so that they are making sure that they're not piking the hips this way, right? I feel like we were all told in gym class in elementary school to drop your hips. But this can actually put a lot of pressure on the lower back And if I'm doing my push-up from here, my hips are gonna reach the floor first, which is the opposite of what I want. I want my chest to reach the ground first, so I get a deeper range of motion in the upper body. So we wanna lift those hips up just slightly. I would rather have those hips in line with the shoulders than below the elbows, right? So I coach some protraction of the scapula, so almost like a little concave in that chest. Once again, the middle fingers are pointing straight ahead and wrists are right underneath the shoulders. And I want those hips to be nice and high. So this is a position that we've got to really drill in. And then I also emphasize the corkscrew of the arms at the top. This is gonna help stabilize those shoulders by externally rotating from those shoulder joints. Okay, just think about the pits of the elbows turning forward. So we can strengthen this plank position obviously in a bunch of different ways. We can also work on stabilizing this position by lifting one limb at a time, arms or legs, right? Just working on the stability of those joints and limbs in that plank position. So once we have the quadruped push-up in the plank ready to go, it's time to start bringing them together with a negative or eccentric push-up. So we'll start in that plank position and we're gonna go through the mechanics of rowing or pulling yourself down to the floor. The goal is to maintain the plank as you go through that mechanical pull or row to the floor. So we're retracting the scapula, pulling down and trying not to let those hips collapse down towards the floor. Once you get to the bottom, you can do a little isometric hold here as well, making sure that the chest is lower than those hips. And then you're just gonna relax to the floor and then come back up out of that position to reset. So we're not gonna push up out of that. We're gonna take that eccentric or that descent as slowly as possible, gripping the floor with those fingertips. Okay, that's also gonna add to the tension of this movement at the bottom. I always like to coach as deep as you can go. Hold 1 inch away from the floor. Find that plank position again down here. And then release to the ground. Shift back to start that again. I'll show you one more time. This is our eccentric push-up. We're taking the mechanics of the push-up and adding it to the plank. And you're imagining that you're rowing yourself to the floor. Nice and slow, holding at the bottom, and then release. So we're working that eccentric part first, which is gonna really build the strength that we need to then push ourselves back up. So once I've built that, then we go into a dead stop push-up. So we're starting on the floor. We're gonna use momentum to hoist ourselves and push the floor away from us. So it's not like, so I don't want you to think about lifting your body away from the floor. I want you to think about pushing the floor away from you, and that's how you're gonna push up, okay? Similar to deadlifts, you're not thinking about lifting the weight off the floor, you're thinking of driving your feet down into the ground to bring your hips underneath you, which is the leverage you need to lift that weight off the ground. Okay, so from this bottom position, we're gonna be active. So the toes are tucked under, the legs are nice and straight, because again, as we come up, we're trying to avoid doing a worm off of the floor. The hips need to come off of the floor first. So imagine you're at the very bottom of that push-up, okay? So we don't want the hands to be out here or in any weird position. You could just kind of take that negative down if you're unsure of where you need to be in space. Toes are active, legs are active, glutes are squeezing. We want to make sure that the abdominals are engaged, so the ribs and hips are pulling together. Then from here, we're gonna lift up the elbows and the hands, almost winding up, and then you're gonna drive those hands down into the floor and push the floor away from you to come up to that push up movement and that plank at the top. So we can come back down, reset. Make sure that the shoulders stay away from the ground. That's a big target point of this movement, is to make sure that we don't push into the shoulders and worm up off the floor. Okay, so we lift, use the momentum, the wind up to push the floor away from you, and then reset. All right, so we got our dead stop push up, using that wind up and momentum to really push as fast as you can away from the floor. So then we can put it all together. We start from the top of the plank, we pull ourselves and row to that bottom position, and then we push up out of it, right? Harder than it looks, not as easy as it seems. So we can go back to our yoga block and we could do our target practice again once we start to put it all together in one movement. So we can dive the nose or the chin forward to the block or your target, right? Set it up slightly in front of you. We're gonna retract and pull to the target and then push up out of it, right? We can also progress that lower or even move it back so it's towards the base of the hands. And once again, pulling down to that target and pushing out of it. Always make sure you have that pause at the bottom of the push-up. We're not jumping or bouncing in and out of it. We're controlling the descent and pushing, powering through the ascent or the concentric part of that movement. Once we have that target practice down, we've got that depth, then we can go all the way into our full push-up, pulling down into that position and pushing up out of it. Pulling into that position and push. Pulling into that deep, deep, deep. Pulling, rowing to the floor and pushing the floor away from you. And that's the process that I take. It's not always so linear and exactly these steps. Like I said, there could be mobility issues that get in the way, or we may need to tweak some things. There are way more variations that we can do, but this is the general outline that I take to teaching push-ups. If you found this helpful, please share, like, and subscribe. If you have any questions about this process or these movements, drop them in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.